In our increasingly digital world, there's something fundamental underpinning everything we do online. It's cybersecurity risk management.
Right. It's essentially about safeguarding data, ensuring only the right people have access, and, well, preventing loss or unauthorized disclosure.
Exactly. And it's not just about tech, is it? It's crucial for security, for good governance, even legal compliance.
Absolutely critical. And for this deep dive, using the materials you shared, we're really going to unpack risk management properly.
Right.
We want to get beyond the surface level, really understand threats, vulnerabilities, how organizations protect themselves. Make sure you, the listener, get a thorough understanding without it feeling, overwhelming.
Sounds good. So what's the roadmap for this deep dive? Where are we headed?
Well, we'll start with the basic building blocks, the risk elements.
Okay, elements like assets, threats, vulnerabilities, that sort of thing.
Precisely. Assets, threats, vulnerabilities, also exposure, risk itself, and importantly, safeguards. Then we'll dive into risk assessment.
The how-to part.
Yeah, the quantitative, putting numbers on it, and the qualitative methods. We'll even touch on the Delphi technique.
Interesting. And after assessment.
Then we look at risk responses. What do organizations do about the risks? We'll talk about residual risk, what's left over. And finally, we'll walk through the NIST risk management framework.
NIST RMF.
I got it.
The goal is a clear, structured picture.
Exactly, a solid understanding. So let's start with those risk elements. First up, assets.
Right. Assets. In this context, what exactly counts as an asset?
Okay, so an asset is basically any resource, data, system, anything really that has value and needs protection. Could be tangible, like a server, or intangible, like data or reputation.
Anything with value still feels a bit broad. Can we break that down? Give us some concrete examples.
Sure. Let's start with informational assets. This is often the big one. Think sensitive data, customer info, financial records.
PII, financial data.
Right. Also, intellectual property IP, trade secrets, your secret sauce, basically. These are hugely valuable informational assets.
Got it. That's clear. What about physical things?
Yep. Physical assets, computers, servers, network gear like routers and switches, data centers, even the office buildings themselves, all need protecting.
Okay. And you mentioned intangible before, but what about people?
Absolutely. Human assets, employees, contractors, anyone authorized to access systems, their knowledge, their actions, they're critical assets, often overlooked too.
That's a really good point. What else?
Software assets are huge. Applications, operating systems, databases, they often contain the vulnerabilities we'll talk about later.
Right, the software itself.
Network assets too. Firewalls, routers, switches, the plumbing of the network. Intellectual property again, but think patents, copyrights, trademarks, the legal side.
Uh-huh.
And don't forget reputational assets, the brand's value. A breach can hammer that.
Oh.
Finally, straightforward financial assets, money, investments.
Wow, okay. That's a lot more comprehensive than maybe people first think.
Yeah.
So with all these different types, why is step one always identifying and classifying them? Why is that so fundamental?
Great question. It boils down to this. You can't protect what you don't know you have. Simple as that.
Makes sense.
Identifying gives you the inventory. Classifying then tells you how much protection it needs based on value, sensitivity, criticality.
So you focus your efforts.
Exactly. You prioritize. Your critical customer database needs way more protection than, say, the public website's marketing copy. Budgets aren't infinite, so you need to focus resources where they matter most.
Right. Protect the crown jewels first. Okay, assets covered. What's the flip side of the coin? What puts them in danger?
That would be threats. Threats are any potential event or action that could harm those assets we just discussed.
Potential harm. Can they come from anywhere?
Pretty much. Inside the organization, internal threats. Or outside external threats. And they can be deliberate, like an attack, or accidental, like someone deleting the wrong file.
Okay, so what kind of threats should organizations be worried about? Can you give us the landscape?
It's broad. First, cybersecurity threats, the obvious ones. Malware, like viruses, ransomware.
Ransomware, yeah, that's everywhere.
Definitely. Phishing attempts, hacking, distributed denial of service or DDoS attacks, that whole category.
And a minefield.
Yeah.
But it's not just digital, right? You mentioned accidental.
Correct. Physical threats are real too. Theft of laptops or drives, vandalism, natural disasters, fires, floods, you name it.
Right.
Then human threats. Insider threats are a big concern. Malicious insiders acting deliberately or just employees making mistakes, unintentional compromises.
The human element again.
Always. Environmental threats too, power outages, overheating hardware interference, and finally, legal and regulatory threats. Failing to comply can mean hefty fines and damage.
It really does come from all angles. Now, you said threats exploit vulnerabilities. Can you expand on that connection a bit more?
Sure, think of it like this. A threat is the potential danger, like a burglar casing a house. But the burglar needs a way in an unlocked window, a weak door. That weakness is the vulnerability. So the burglar, takes advantage of the vulnerability, the unlocked window to achieve their goal, which is harming the asset, like stealing things from the house. No vulnerability, no easy way in for the threat.
That clears it nicely. Before we dig into vulnerabilities, you mentioned threat agents. Who or what are they?
Good catch. A threat agent is simply the entity carrying out the threat. The who or what behind it.
So like the burglar in your analogy.
Exactly. We split them into human and non-human. Human agents are hackers, cybercriminals, disgruntled employees, spies, people.
Right.
Non-human agents are things like malicious software scripts, botnets, those networks of zombie computers, malware itself, like viruses, worms, ransomware acting automatic.
Okay, so people or programs.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, let's properly unpack vulnerabilities. What are they exactly?
A vulnerability is that weakness we talked about. It's a flaw, a gap, a misconfiguration in your systems, security, controls, even physical setup that a threat agent can exploit.
It's the chink in the armor.
Precisely. It's the exploitable weakness.
So where do these weaknesses typically hide? Give us some examples.
Oh, they can be everywhere. Software vulnerabilities are super common. Bugs in code, flaws in applications or operating systems. Attackers love these.
Patches are for those, right?
Ideally, yes. Then there are configuration vulnerabilities, mistakes made setting things up, leaving default passwords, overly open firewall rules, bad access controls.
So these mistakes to make, I suppose.
Very easy. Physical vulnerabilities too, weak locks on server room doors, no cameras, poor environmental protection. And human vulnerabilities, huge one. People clicking bad links, falling for phishing scams because of poor awareness, mishandling data. Social engineering targets these. Even weak policies can be a vulnerability.
It seems like a constant battle on multiple fronts. What about those zero-day vulnerabilities you mentioned? They sound particularly nasty.
They are. A zero-day is a vulnerability that's actively being exploited before the software vendor or the security community even knows it exists.
Yeah, there's no fix available.
Exactly. No patch, no defense readily available when the attacks start. The vendor has had 0 days to fix it. That's why they're so dangerous. Attackers have a free run until it's discovered and patched, which can take time.
That's definitely high risk.
Okay.
Assets, threats, vulnerabilities. Next on the list was exposure. What does that mean here?
Exposure is the state of being susceptible to loss. Because a threat can exploit a vulnerability, it means the pathway exists for harm to happen.
So it means you could be harmed, not that you have been.
Correct. It's the possibility of loss, not the certainty. It indicates the conditions are right for a negative impact on an asset.
And you mentioned it relates to the exposure factor in quantitative analysis.
Yes. When we try to put dollar figures on risk, the exposure factor, or EF, comes in. It's the percentage of an asset's value that's expected to be lost if a specific threat hits a specific vulnerability.
A percentage loss, like 30% of the server's value.
Exactly. If that server gets hit by that malware, we estimate a 30% loss, so the EF is 0.3 or 30%. It helps calculate potential financial damage.
Got it. Exposure is being open to harm. EF quantifies how much harm, which leads us perfectly to risk itself. How do we tie all this together to define risk?
Risk is the probability or likelihood of harm occurring when a threat exploits a vulnerability. It's where threat and vulnerability meet with potential negative consequences for an asset.
So it needs both the threat and the weakness.
Yes. A simple way to think about it is risk, threat x vulnerability. It's not literal math, but it shows risk depends on both factors. Reduce the threat or reduce the vulnerability, and you reduce the risk.
That's a really helpful mental model. What happens when that potential becomes reality? What does it mean for a risk to be realized?
A risk is realized when the threat actually succeeds in exploiting a vulnerability, causing harm, damage, or unauthorized disclosure. It's the point where potential turns into an actual incident, the thing we're trying to prevent.
The security event. Okay. So how do we prevent risks from being realized? That's where safeguards come in.
Right.
Exactly. Safeguards, also called controls or countermeasures, are the actions, devices, procedures, or techniques used to reduce or eliminate vulnerabilities or protect against threats.
The defenses.
The defenses. They can be technical, like firewalls, administrative, like policies, or physical, like locks and guards.
Can you give us a wide range of examples? What do these look like?
Sure. Applying software patches, that's a big one for software vulnerabilities. Using strong authentication, like multi-factor authentication. Employee security awareness training, vital for human vulnerabilities. Firewalls. Intrusion prevention systems to block bad network traffic. Encrypting data, both when stored and when moving.
Okay.
Physical security like guards, cameras, access badges for server rooms. Regular data backups, and having a disaster recovery plan. Even simple things like a clean desk policy.
That covers a lot of ground, from tech to policy to physical. You also mentioned safeguards aren't always about buying new things.
That's right. Often it's about changing configurations or processes, reconfiguring a firewall rule, tightening access permissions on a file share. Those use existing tools.
It's tuning what you already have.
Exactly. Or maybe removing something risky, like decommissioning an old unsupported application. That removal is the safeguard. Updating policies, enforcing better password rules, those are administrative safeguards, not new tech.
Good point. It's not always about spending more money. So just to cement this, can you quickly recap how all these elements, assets, threats, vulnerabilities, exposure, risk, safeguards, link together?
Okay, quick summary. Organizations have valuable assets. Threats exist that could harm them. Threats exploit vulnerabilities, weaknesses. This creates exposure, the possibility of harm, which is the risk. To reduce risk, organizations implement safeguards to protect assets by addressing threats or vulnerabilities.
Perfect. Clear chain of events. Now, a few more terms popped up. Attack, breach, penetration. How do they fit in?
Right. An attack is the active attempt by a threat agent to exploit a vulnerability. It's intentional.
The act.
Yes. A breach is when that attack succeeds in bypassing a security control or defense.
Putting past the guard.
Exactly. And penetration, or intrusion, is the result of a successful attack and breach, where the attacker gains unauthorized access into the organization's systems or network.
So attack is the try, breach is succeeding against defenses, penetration is getting inside.
You got it. When penetration happens, assets are directly threatened.
Okay, that clarifies those actions. Now we understand the pieces. How do organizations figure out how much risk they actually face? This must be where risk assessment comes in.
Precisely. Risk assessment or risk analysis is the whole process of identifying, analyzing, and evaluating these risks.
What's the main goal?
To give management a clear picture of the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the potential impact. It informs decisions. And while security pros often do the assessment, it's crucial that upper management understands it, sets the scope, and ultimately approves the findings. They own the risk.
So leadership has to be involved. You also said 100% risk elimination is impossible.
Yeah, pretty much impossible and impractical. Trying to eliminate all risk would mean stopping all activity, which isn't feasible. Plus, the cost would be astronomical.
Right.
So management has to decide what level of risk is acceptable for the organization. That's their risk appetite. Balancing potential harm against the cost of controls.
A calculated trade-off. Now, you mentioned two main ways to do this assessment. Quantitative and qualitative. Let's tackle quantitative first. Numbers, right?
Quantitative risk assessment tries to assign numerical values, usually monetary values, to risk components, potential losses, costs of controls, their value. It aims for objectivity, though some estimation is always involved.
How does it work? You mentioned 6 phases.
Yes, typically 6 phases. Phase 1 is asset inventory and valuation. We talked about inventorying assets. Here you assign a specific monetary value, the asset value, or AV, to each one, based on cost, replacement, revenue generated, etc. Crucial first step.
Putting a price tag on everything. Okay, phase 1. What's 2?
Phase 2, threat identification and SLE calculation. For each asset, list the potential threats. Then, for each threat asset pair, figure out the single loss expectancy, or SLE.
SLE. How do you get that?
You first estimate the exposure factor, EF, that percentage loss we discussed. Then, SLE equals asset value, AV, times exposure factor, EF. So SLE is the expected money lost from a single occurrence of that threat hitting that asset.
Okay, the cost per incident. What's phase 3?
Phase 3. Determine the annualized rate of occurrence, ARO. This is how often you expect that specific threat to happen in a year. Is it once a decade? ARO equals 0.1. Twice a year, ARO 2. This often involves historical data, threat intel, expert judgment.
So how often the bad thing happens annually? Now we have cost per incident, SLE, and frequency per year.
Yep.
ARO, what's next? Phase 4.
Phase 4. Calculate the annualized loss expectancy, ALE. This is the big one for quantitative analysis. You simply multiply the SLE by the ARO. ALE, XLE, X, AR.
What does the ALE tell us?
It tells you the total expected financial loss from that specific threat against that specific asset over an entire year on average. It helps you prioritize which risks cost you the most annually.
Okay, that's a powerful number for decision making. Now we know the potential annual cost. Phase 5 must be about solutions.
Exactly. Phase 5. Countermeasure research and impact on AROE. You research safeguards for each threat. Then you estimate how much each safeguard would reduce the ARO, usually, or maybe the SLE. The main goal of controls is often to make the threat happen less often.
Reducing the frequency.
Right. So you calculate a new ALE, a post-safeguard ALE, based on the reduced ARO or maybe SLE that you expect with the safeguard in place.
So you see how much the control could potentially save you each year, which leads logically to the last phase.
Phase 6. Cost-benefit analysis of countermeasures. This is the bottom line. You figure out the total annual cost of the safeguard itself, purchase, setup, maintenance, operation, training, everything. Let's call that ACS, annual cost of safeguard. Then you compare the savings to the cost. A common formula is value of safeguard, pre-safeguard ALE, post-safeguard ALE, ACS.
So old expected loss minus new expected loss minus the cost of the fix.
Precisely. If that value is positive, the safeguard looks financially beneficial. But, and this is important, money isn't everything.
How so?
Legal requirements, regulations do care. Your responsibility to protect data might mandate certain controls, even if the pure financial calculation doesn't show a profit. The cost of noncompliance or a major breach can dwarf the control cost.
Right, reputational damage, fines. Those have huge costs too. Okay, that's a thorough look at quantitative assessment.
Yeah.
What at the other side? Qualitative. How's that different?
Qualitative assessment skips the hard dollar figures. It focuses on scenarios, expert judgment, subjective ratings. You rank risks maybe high, medium, low based on likelihood and impact.
More descriptive, less numerical.
Exactly. It's often faster and can be better for risks that are hard to quantify, like reputation damage.
What techniques are used here?
Things like brainstorming sessions, focus groups, surveys, interviews with key staff, using checklists, developing threat scenarios or storyboards.
Sounds more collaborative.
It often is. And there's the Delphi technique. That's a structured way to get expert opinions anonymously.
How does Delphi work?
You gather anonymous input from a group of experts on risk ratings or scenarios. Then you compile the results, share them back with the group, still anonymous, and let them revise their input based on seeing the group's collective view. You repeat this a few times until you reach a general consensus. It helps reduce bias from dominant personalities.
Interesting. Anonymous feedback loops to reach agreement. So is one method, quantitative or qualitative, better than the other?
Not really better, just different tools for different jobs. Quantitative is great for financial justification and prioritizing based on cost.
Yeah.
But it can be complex and needs good data.
Right.
Qualitative is often quicker, easier, better for capturing broader or harder to price risks. Its weakness is subjectivity.
So what do most organizations do?
Honestly, many use a hybrid approach. Use qualitative methods to get a broad overview and identify key risks, then maybe drill down with quantitative analysis on the highest priority ones to justify spending. Best of both worlds.
That blend makes a lot of sense. Okay, assessment done. We know our risks. What's next? Deciding what to do about them.
Exactly. That's risk response. Choosing and implementing strategies to address the identified risks, aligning with the organization's risk appetite.
What are the main options here? How can organizations respond?
There are several core strategies. First is risk avoidance.
Just don't do the risky thing.
Very much. If a project or activity is just too risky and the cost to fix it is too high compared to the benefit, you might just cancel it or not start it. Avoid the risk entirely, usually for severe risks.
Makes sense for extreme cases. What else?
Risk mitigation or reduction. This is probably the most common. It means implementing safeguards to lower the likelihood or the impact of the risk. All those controls we discussed earlier fall under mitigation.
Actively fixing or reducing the problem. Okay. What if you can't fully mitigate it?
Then you might consider risk transfer or assignment. Shifting the risk, usually the financial consequence, to a third party.
How do you do that?
Buying insurance is the classic example. outsourcing a risky function, or using contracts to make a vendor liable. You're paying someone else to take on some or all of the financial hit if the risk occurs.
Okay, shifting the burden. What about risks that are maybe small or too expensive to fix relative to their impact?
That leads to risk acceptance. You acknowledge the risk exists but decide not to take action, other than maybe having a contingency plan.
You just live with it.
Essentially, yes, it can be active acceptance, you have a plan B, or passive, you just accept it. Usually for low likelihood, low impact risks where the cost of other responses isn't justified, management formally accepts it.
Got it. Are there ways to, scare threats away?
Kind of. That's risk deterrence. Using measures to discourage threats from even trying, making yourself a harder target. Visible security cameras, guards, strong logging procedures, advertising that you audit logs, having a known incident response capability. It's about increasing the perceived effort or risk for the attacker.
Makes sense. Any other responses?
Well, there's risk rejection, which is basically denial, pretending the risk doesn't exist.
That sounds bad.
It is. It's irresponsible and not a real risk management strategy. You have to acknowledge and address risks appropriately.
Okay, so avoidance, mitigation, transfer, acceptance, deterrence, but not rejection.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, after we apply these responses, does risk just vanish? This brings us to residual risk, right?
Correct. You almost never eliminate all risk. Residual risk is the risk that's left over after you've implemented all your chosen safeguards and responses.
The leftover risk.
Yes. It's the risk that management has implicitly or explicitly decided to accept, often because further reduction wasn't feasible or cost-effective.
So before we did anything, that was total risk.
Exactly. Total risk, or inherent risk, is the risk level before any controls are applied.
And the difference between total risk and residual risk. What is that called?
That difference represents how much risk your controls actually reduced. It's sometimes called the controls gap or risk reduction. So residual risk equals total risk controls gap.
Okay, that equation helps visualize it. So we've identified, assessed, responded, and we understand what's left. How do organizations manage this whole life cycle systematically? That's where frameworks like the NIST RMF come in, I assume.
Precisely. The NIST Risk Management Framework, outlined in Special Publication 837, provides a structured, comprehensive approach to manage information security and privacy risks.
NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology.
That's the one. While developed for the U.S. federal government, it's widely adopted in the private sector, too, because it's solid and adaptable. It treats risk management as a continuous life cycle.
A life cycle. How many steps are involved?
There are 7 main steps in the NIST RMF. Step 1 is prepare.
Getting ready.
Essentially, yes. Establishing the context, defining the risk strategy, identifying stakeholders, determining risk tolerance, assigning roles, getting resources, laying the groundwork.
Okay, foundation set. Step 2.
Step 2, categorize. You identify and categorize your information systems based on their importance and the sensitivity of the data they handle. High-impact systems need stronger controls. NIST SP 860 helps here.
Matching protection to importance. Makes sense. Step 3.
Step 3, select. Based on the system category and risk assessment, you choose the specific security controls needed. NIST SP 800-53 has a big catalog of controls to choose from and tailor.
Choosing the right tools for the job. Okay, step 4 must be.
Step 4, implement. You actually put the selected controls in place, configure the software, write the procedures, train the people, make the controls operational.
Taking it real. What's step 5?
Step 5, assess. You check if the controls you implemented are actually working correctly and effectively. Through testing, scanning, audits, reviews, find out if they're doing what they're supposed to do.
Testing the defenses. Okay, step 6.
Step 6, authorize. Senior management reviews the assessment results. Based on the effectiveness of the controls and the remaining residual risk, they make a formal decision to authorize the system to operate. It's the official acceptance of the risk.
The formal, go ahead. What's the last step? Step 7.
Step 7, monitor. This is crucial and ongoing. You continuously watch the systems and controls. Perform ongoing assessments, check logs, look for changes in threats or the environment. Security isn't set it and forget it.
Constant vigilance.
Exactly. Monitoring feeds back into the process. If things change, you might need to go back through the steps, slip new controls, reassess, reauthorize. It's a cycle.
So it really is a continuous loop. You mentioned the RMS is flexible.
Yes, very. It's not a rigid prescription. Organizations tailor it. They choose controls based on their specific risks, needs, and resources. It scales from small systems to large enterprises. That risk-based adaptability is key to its success.
Well, that has certainly been a comprehensive deep dive. We've covered a massive amount of ground on cybersecurity risk management.
We really have. Started with those core risk elements: assets, threats, vulnerabilities, exposure, risk, safeguards. Then moved through assessment: quantitative, qualitative, the Delphi technique.
Right. Then the risk responses: avoidance, mitigation, transfer, acceptance, deterrence.
And understanding residual risk versus total risk.
Exactly. And finally, walking through that structured 7-step NIST risk management framework: prepare, categorize, select, implement, assess, authorize, and monitor.
So hopefully, by unpacking all of that, you, our listener, now have a much clearer, more structured grasp of just how complex and vital risk management is today.
Absolutely. And maybe something to think about. Given how interconnected everything is and how fast threats change, what's the single biggest challenge for organizations in managing this risk effectively right now? Is it the speed of threats, prioritizing resources, or maybe getting everyone top to bottom truly security aware? It's definitely something that keeps evolving.